Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm State Representative Seth Grove of the 196th District in York County. On today's program, I'd like to introduce you to a player in the budget process you may not be familiar with. The Independent Fiscal Office was created in 2010 to study the economy of Pennsylvania and make nonpartisan projections on how much money the state is expected to collect in taxes. This information, along with other economic research they conduct, is used to set out the framework for each year's budget. Joining me today to explain their work for the Independent Fiscal Office and to update us on the Commonwealth's fiscal health are Director Matt Knittel and Deputy Director Mark Ryan. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we discuss what you do in totality, let's go back to your original charter and the original legislation for which the Independent Fiscal Office was created. So can you give us your original intent, and then we'll go into all the items that the General Assembly has expanded and added to your plate through the short 6 years of kind of your creation.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here. As you noted, the office was created in 2010 by Act 120. We became operational in 2011, and currently we have 11 staff on board, and we may hire a few more, so we're slowly expanding as we take on new duties. Our primary obligation is to provide revenue estimates of the general fund to the General Assembly, and we do that 4 times a year. Our main releases are in May and then again in November. In addition to that, as you noted, we also take on special requests of the General Assembly, and we've talked about property tax reform, Medicaid expansion, natural gas drilling, so a very wide range of special topics. And the comparison that we like to make is we view the office's mission similar to the Congressional Budget Office at the federal level. That is, we provide nonpartisan analysis, nonpartisan revenue estimates, and I would note that the revenue estimates are only for advisory purposes only. So the governor will still certify the official estimate that's used in the budget, and our number is, of course, compared to theirs, but it's not the official estimate.
And it's amazing to collect all that data and put out the reports that you guys, and just in York County specific, the delegation asked you guys to kind of research a consolidation of York County school districts to see the cost, which was, being close to Maryland, people bring that up all the time about cost savings, administrative costs, and your study really brought some data home for future research to look at, but also kind of address that moving forward. So just on behalf of the delegation, just want to thank you for your hard work and due diligence doing those kind of reports. But since your inception, besides revenue estimates and all the other things, recently you're now in charge of actuarial analysis on pension bills and amendments moving forward, and obviously there was a battle over the former inhabitant Pennsylvania Employee Retirement Commission who was charged with doing that. How has that been going? Obviously the first one you have done was a pension bill that ultimately didn't get a vote in the House, but you did some work. How has that been progressing forward?
So Mark, the Deputy Director, heads our efforts in pension analysis, so I'll defer to him for that answer.
Okay. Well, thank you. It was, I would say, somewhat of a trial by fire. Very soon after assuming the duties for these type of analyses, there was a bill to analyze, and it was a very good learning experience. It took quite a bit of coordination between the various pension systems, the legislative offices, to try to determine a timetable. And ultimately, I think we learned quite a bit from that process, and we're committed to looking at what we did and trying to improve upon it for future efforts. But I think it was a solid effort to begin with, and I think that we'll just take that and then learn from it, as I'm sure it's likely to come up again.
I hope so. It's a major cost driver, obviously, pointed out many times in many financial documents you guys have put out. And I can say through your work, you particularly on the actuarial analysis, your organization has a great way of taking very complex items and breaking it down very simplistically so people can understand it. So I do appreciate, I think a layman could easily kind of go through that report who may not be, dealing in pensions day to day, like an average citizen can go through, your actuarial notes and you break it down in a way that I think the general public can understand that. So I do want to applaud you on work and your first kind of foray into that area. So let's get into some other aspects. Obviously, the big thing is the revenue estimates. You do have kind of monthly updates for small ones. Your big one is kind of a 5-year look of kind of current practice. You look at current statute and project out for 5 years. Can you give us an overview of where we're at in this fiscal year and kind of what we're looking at next year and into the future?
Sure. So you're referring to our 5-year outlook report, and we release that every November 15th. And what the report tries to do is to shift the focus away from the short term to the long term. And it asks the question, if economic growth returns to normal and all the temporary provisions are no longer effective, what's the status of the budget? And our most recent report, what we found is that in the long term, under the current policies, we're projecting a structural deficit of about $2.5 to $3 billion. For this fiscal year, we have a deficit that could range from 500 to 900 million, depending on whether we include some supplemental appropriations for the Department of Human Services. And then for next year, it could range from 1.7 billion to 2.2 billion, again, depending on whether one includes those supplemental appropriations.
Wow. As far as our revenue structure, it seems like our revenue growth is deteriorating. Is that an economic issue, a demographic issue, combination of the two? What's kind of pushing into those realities of us not bringing in the revenue that we were estimated to bring in?
And that's one of the fundamental concepts that we find, is that the revenue growth can't keep pace with the expenditure growth. And part of that is due to what we refer to as tax base erosion. So for example, over time, individuals will spend less on taxable goods and more on non-taxable services. And part of that's due to the economy, but part of it's also due to demographic trends. So as people age, they'll spend more on healthcare services, which are not taxable, and less on things such as new cars or furniture for a new home. So we're seeing that over time, and we expect that to continue as the population continues to age.
So we have kind of a weakening working class and an expanding baby boomer retirement age, and obviously we have huge tax preference here in Pennsylvania for retirees. We don't tax any kind of pension, retirement income. Social Security is non-taxable, so it's really a safe shelter for senior citizens. Lower cost of living as far as a Northeast Rust Belt state. So we have a lot of great senior programs. You know, we're the only state that has a lottery that actually funds aging services. Every other state funds education. So we are a haven. Is it a job issue that we're losing out on those millennials, those working class age groups to kind of bolster the personal income tax and those sales tax items to bolster them? Or are you seeing a trend that companies are leaving because of whatever economic conditions here in the Commonwealth?
Well, part of it is what we're witnessing in Pennsylvania is true of the U.S., but in particular northeastern states where we have an older population demographic. In here, what we're projecting in our report based on the state demographer is actually those aged 20 to 64 over the next decade will actually contract. So we have a lot of concern that if that happens, the labor force will contract, and that will affect economic growth. So that's our main concern going forward is how do we counteract that? How do we encourage people either to move into the state? How do we retain people who might otherwise move out? And how do we increase labor force participation rates? How do we get folks who could work to actually work and elect that outcome?
Yeah, and I think it's been a growing problem. We always talk about the brain drain. We have great higher ed institutions where we educate at world-class facilities, and then they sporadically leave. So it's been a struggling issue moving forward, but it's a wonderful demographics. There's another issue you brought up, and I think it's part of your original charter to kind of analyze performance-based budgeting. Recently you came out with another well-done report just from a legislator sitting on appropriations for the past 4 years, getting information from that's easily accessible and readable from the administration, regardless Republican, Democrat, has been very, very hard to get. Your report in there, your analysis of corrections was great. It's kind of the information we've been looking for as legislators moving forward. So can you kind of go into depth how you came up with that report, your findings, and where you see the IFO going?
Yeah, as you noted, we were required by statute to publish a report on performance measures and to really take an overview of what other states are doing and what might work well here in Pennsylvania. And currently, there are nearly 600 performance measures that are already published, either in the budget or on the Budget Office's website. So there's a lot of work, a lot of performance measures that could be used. But our understanding from talking to staff on the appropriations committees is they're really not leveraged currently. They're not utilized. And so what we attempted to do is we developed what we call the prototype report that really gathered those existing performance measures and put them in an easily understandable format that really directed your attention to what was important. One other thing that we also added that wasn't currently done is we made comparisons across states. So we compared Pennsylvania to all of the surrounding states. We compared things such as the average cost of an inmate or the average cost of health care so that you could have these benchmarks to gauge how Pennsylvania is performing.
Yeah, it was, and again, I can't applaud you enough for your great work on that. It really put data in a usable format that I think, again, the average citizen can look through and gauge how a department is doing moving forward. So I just, on behalf of me and a lot of my colleagues, we hope you continue down that path, because it's and again, it's good independent analysis. You guys don't have really a stake in the game. You can provide the information in an effective, readable format for the average citizen, and people can make their determinations moving forward. So I don't know what the long-term plan is, but we at least really appreciated it.
Well, that's good to hear, and we appreciate the positive feedback or even what could be done differently, so we're always open to suggestions. And I would like to note, since we're on that topic, to thank the Department of Corrections, because we did work in cooperation with them, and they were very helpful.
Yeah, and that's what it takes. I think a lot of people in government are always hesitant about opening up their books and sending out data, because data can be used for various stuff. But if you have an entity like the Independent Fiscal Office, who is inherently independent and just wants to put out information in a way that's easily accessible, easily readable, they don't have a stake in the game. They're presenting facts and data as it appears. I think that's healthy for taxpayers, average citizens, and obviously policymakers moving forward. Whatever political persuasion or ideology you want real actual facts that aren't manipulated by any way. So it's a huge role, and again, we really appreciate that. So what's on the horizon for the Independent Fiscal Office? Obviously the General Assembly likes you guys a lot. We appreciate your work. Where do you think you go from here? You kind of at your point where you want to slow things down a little bit and kind of focus on the actuarial stuff and your data from here?
Well, I think at this point, we're just really consolidating our duties, and I'll let Mark speak to. We had some ideas on perhaps pension analysis. We'd like to revisit that and kind of add some more rigor to those new duties. As Mark noted, that was our first pass at it, and we always try to improve every time we come out the door, of course. But Mark, anything on the pension front?
Well, we expect if patterns hold that reform proposals will be reintroduced, and it's very likely in the first 6 months of the new year that additional action will be taken. So we expect to be called upon to perform additional analyses, and part of our process, as Matt noted, of improving is to consult with stakeholders and get feedback on the initial effort and ideas for improvement. And as we're able to do so, we certainly want to make our reports more useful. And it was kind of you to say it was somewhat understandable. We'd like to even make it even more so to the extent possible. So I think we're open to different ideas on how to do that and how to communicate those ideas more effectively and handle our responsibilities. So Matt and I have talked about a lot of different ideas, so we hope to be implementing some of them as we as we are able throughout this process.
That's great. And of course, all this is found on your website, all your reports, all your analysis, every request from the General Assembly. You always post the outcome online, as well as actuarial notes. So it's great for average citizens to go see how the finances of the Commonwealth are going, whatever reports you guys are looking at. It's great that there's that public image that anytime people can up at 3 a.m. want to read about economics of Pennsylvania. You can go on the IFO and find that out. So I want to refocus in on pensions. Just for people in the background, you have both CSRS and PSRS plans. They both have their actuarials that they contract with, correct?
Yes.
So you guys need the third actuarial as the independent that's not attached to those other two to kind of verify the plan's data as well, correct?
That's right. Each system has their own actuary, and when a proposal comes out, they'll put out a cost note, an actuarial impact respective to that system. So the state employees and the public school employees systems each have their own actuaries. Our actuary is tasked with taking their work, reviewing it, and kind of making it a little bit more consistent for reporting purposes because we combine it together. Each system has slightly different time periods over which they project. So our actuary helps to put that together and just some basic checking for consistency and thoroughness so that the General Assembly has some assurance, a third set of eyes essentially regarding the numbers and that they've been thoroughly vetted before a proposal is considered. And that's really the intent of the actuarial reports and the analysis, to have that information available to the legislators before taking a vote.
Yeah. How much lead time do the actuarials need to actually do the work properly and effectively?
There's a fairly extensive time period needed, one to do the analysis, and the actuarial firms have peer review requirements. So that before they release information, it has to be reviewed internally. So it does take a little bit of time to do that. It's not quite as quick of a turnaround as a bill on other types of topics where one can move a little faster. Because we are dealing with outside firms and some complex analysis, it takes more time than normal, and that's always a factor in the legislative calendar. So there's a little bit of tension in that and the time needed to do an analysis versus the need to move
forward,
a product along on the calendar. So I think that's always an issue that has to be worked with as we go through that process, and that's one of our challenges.
Yeah. And thinking back, I think we've been through every kind of pension plan, DB change, defined contribution, cash balance, stacked hybrid, side-by-side. I'm not sure what's left as far as a concept to analyze moving forward. So hopefully a lot of work has been done between the plethora of different pension concepts, the General Assembly. I mean, just thinking about this over these past 2 years, from Senate Bill 1 to the side-by-side DB-DC that was on the House floor, a few months ago. So I'm sure there's tons of actuarial information kind of prepped, ready to go for the myriad. So at least some legwork is kind of done for the most part, unless someone comes out with a totally new pension reform concept that nobody else has thought of.
It's always a possibility.
Yeah, it could be. I do want to get back into, we've been running a deficit for a while. Really, I'm not sure Pennsylvania has recovered from the Great Recession. Governor Ed Rendell's last 2 years in office, we had federal stimulus propping stuff up. That went away. Governor Corbett came in and kind of, leveled the expenditures down with the revenue. But it seems every year the General Assembly will bolster revenue, and a lot of it's one-time expenditures that go away the next year. But at the same time, we always increase expenditure. So it's usually like this, but at the end of the day for the next year, we end up like this. And we have to come up here and come up here. Really, to get out of a deficit, you just got to get revenues above expenditures. so you have a surplus. Looking through the history of Pennsylvania, was there a point that we managed spending and also tax revenues came in natural? I mean, we are getting natural growth in revenues. Like more money is coming in every month. We're just not meeting our original estimate. So was there a point where we managed it in kind of recent history? I don't know if we have to go back to Casey, Ridge. When were the kind of good times, and what do you know what Pennsylvania's economy was like back then?
Well, I can speak for since 2011 when we started to put out our reports that every year we put them out, it's been a similar result. That is, in the current year, a minor deficit, and then in the next year, a much larger one, then growing out to something on the order of $2.5 to $3 billion, which is our current result. So, as you noted, what's happened the past 3 or 4 years is some temporary measures have been undertaken. They address the situation for a year or two, but then we return to the status quo, if you will. So it has been, in our opinion, there has been a structural deficit present at least for 5 years that we've been doing this report. And I suspect it is the case that if we went back to the Great Recession, that might have triggered much of it. Prior to that, although we haven't analyzed it, it is true that the economy, both in Pennsylvania and the U.S., was growing at a much stronger clip. And what's happened in the interim is partly due to the Great Recession, but partly due to just the demographics. We've really downshifted growth. So the revenues have downshifted, the expenditures less so. So I do suspect that the structural deficit has been there for some time, and that some structural imbalances have also occurred in the interim.
Yeah, and really to get underneath that, and your assumption is always on current policy.
Yes.
So when we change policy, increase taxes, decrease taxes, change policy to address the cost drivers, it changes the out year aspect of what we're looking at. So really, if we want to fix this, we need policy changes to address the cost drivers, as well as on the revenue side. Governor Wolf's first budget address, he mentioned updating our taxes for the 21st century. I would agree, we need to look at that. We've had the same tax structure for a long, long time. Unfortunately, he came out with billions of new taxes and just said, we're just going to raise everything. I think there's a simpler explanation to sit down as entities and figure out what a good tax structure for Pennsylvania looks like. Because a lot of states have gone through tax commissions and tax changes. We probably have great examples of what that looks like moving forward, particularly with the demographic analysis you got that the Independent Fiscal Office has done. We can kind of come up with something that works into the future but at the same time, we need to handle those expenditures. And when we talk about expenditures, we really got 4 big ones, right? So we got debt. So if you stop, and that's long term, like even if we stop borrowing today, still a legacy cost. Pensions, legacy costs. We talk about pension reform, but it's geared towards new hirees. So you want short-term savings and pensions. You're going after current employees and current retirees. So that's really a long-term systematic change into the future. You have Department of Human Services, corrections, and then you have really everything else in the budget. And those 4 are 80% of the budget?
Probably over 90.
90% of the budget. So really 10% is made up of everything else, including the General Assembly. Most people probably like to say you're expensive, but in the scheme of things, those 4. So within DGS, or within Department of Human Service, DHS, we have always come back with federal mandates, and we can't make any changes unless the feds approve it. We have a change of administration. Things may happen there. Is that an area that we can look at to start curbing back? And I know you guys did a lot of work on Medicaid expansion. If the federal government allows it, and honestly, the new head of Medicare, CMS, Medicare, Medicaid was Governor Pence's kind of human service specialist who brought in Healthy Indiana 2.0. Do you think we have the opportunity to curb those costs moving forward with the new administration? And kind of going back to kind of Healthy PA versus full Medicaid expansion, can we find cost savings within those programs to try to reduce those out-year costs?
Well, as you noted, there has been talk of the repeal of the ACA, and that would have, we think, significant implications for the budget here. It's somewhat of a wild card because we just don't know for sure what the counterfactual will be. In particular, as you're well aware, there was a population known as general assistance population that got moved over to the federal government, and it's not clear what will happen to that population. And a lot of the cost savings or the additional costs would be driven solely by that population. And Mark's worked on this. I don't know if you had any other insights.
Yeah, I think, I mean, as Matt indicated, that it's somewhat of a wild card because we don't know we don't know the timing, what will happen, the timing, what would be in its place. So I know that's something that we're going to need to follow very closely because the General Assembly may find opportunities for a different policy direction depending on what happens with the incoming administration. But it's such a complicated area and things are very much intertwined. It's very difficult for us to sit here and say what's going to happen and the impacts but it could have a very significant impact just because of the amount of Medicaid spending. It's a fairly high share of the budget, so by its nature, it would have a pretty significant impact on the state finances, depending on which way the changes go.
Absolutely. Well, guys, unfortunately, we are out of time. Again, I just want to thank you for your work, your due diligence, and your independent analysis of everything from fiscal policy, economic policy, to the minute requests that you get from the General Assembly. We really appreciate your hard work, and please thank your staff as well for their due diligence and all their hard work on behalf of the residents and taxpayers of Pennsylvania. And unfortunately, we're out of time. I'm State Representative Seth Grove. If you need assistance with any state government matter, feel free to contact me at my local office. The address and number will be shown in a moment. Thanks for watching, and please join me next time for Straight Talk.